get into the big topic of open source, something that we actually say at Red Hat.
This is so awesome.
We are an open culture that believes
actually
in
a big
importance of
piece
What is that process that a developer, or let's say
As the Kubernetes ecosystem really boomed,
Hello and welcome to this week's Ask an OpenShift Admin Office Hour. So this is this is our second stream of 2022, and we have a very exciting topic, one that I've been looking forward to for the better part of like 3 months. How long ago did we schedule this, Johnny?
Before the end of the year.
Yeah, so this is one that we're really, really excited to talk about today. I think I say that just about every week, but I really mean it every week, but especially this week.
Well, it's always good, right? We got plenty of nerd stuff to talk about, and like when you're a nerd, you can finally get after it. And it's normal for us, you know.
Yeah. So I see Stephanie in our internal chat here saying that there might have been a glitch. So just in case, hello everyone, welcome to this week's Red Hat OpenShift. Man, I just completely botched that, didn't I? The Ask an OpenShift Admin Office Hour live stream. Apparently it's going to be one of those days. So hello. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Today's topic, if you did not see the title, we are joined by VMware's very own Dean Lewis, and we will be talking about kind of OpenShift on VMware in general, and we definitely want to have a conversation around the VMware Kubernetes drivers operator as well. So with that being said, I kind of want to introduce Dean first and foremost. So Dean, if you don't mind, as what was it, kindergarten cop, you know, who are you and what do you do? I guess that was who is your daddy, but close enough.
Hello everyone, so my name's Dean Lewis. I'm a cloud solutions architect based at VMware here in the UK, if you can't tell from my lovely accent. And then I've actually been working with OpenShift technology sat on top of VMware for probably about 18 months to 2 years now. And kind of have just been working with some of our internal folk and yourself, Andrew, and some of your team to really look at all of the different integrations that we have, the different parts of the infrastructure that come together and how best take advantage of that. And then we presented together at VMworld talking about our joint innovation lab through your parent, IBM, some of the work that's going on there. And obviously, as you mentioned, one of the things we want to cover today a little bit on is around the vSphere Kubernetes Driver Operator, which is actually one of the outputs of the joint innovation lab with IBM as well.
Yeah, and great minds think alike, Dean, because I was just getting ready to mention our joint VMworld session. So if you happen to have access, and I don't know if you had to have a pass, I don't know how that worked this year with VMworld, but if you have access to the sessions, you can search for either my name or Dean's name, and you'll find that session that we did together. Which was
it's still a free registration for the on-demand video. So if you literally type OpenShift into the video search once you've logged into the vmworld.com website, you'll find our smiling pretty faces.
For better or for worse, right? So this is one of the Red Hat live streaming office hours series of live streams. And what that means is that office hours, much like if you ever had a professor or a manager or somebody like that who had office hours, it's intended for our audience, for you all who are watching us, to be able to ask us anything that's on your mind. So VMware is, of course, it is always a popular topic for I don't know whether it's on purpose or by coincidence, but we always seem to have somebody from the UK on when we talk about VMware, whether it's you, Dean, whether it's we had Robbie on before, Reese, who's a Red Hat employee. So Reese has been on a few times, also from the UK. He lives in Wales, I think, to talk about VMware stuff. So I don't know, something more authoritative about the English accent, maybe. Anyways, so for our audience, please don't hesitate to ask any and all questions that come to mind about VMware, about OpenShift on VMware, about all that stuff. We'll do our best to answer those. If we can't, or if we don't know the answer here, if we can't find the answer and we don't know it, here on the stream, we'll be sure to follow up and get those into the blog post. Last week's blog post, I just heard back this morning. It should be published either today or maybe tomorrow. So please keep an eye on cloud.redhat.com/blog for all of those. And we're churning through the backlog. I did note that, or I was told that they are backdating those old blog posts. So we'll share those in Twitter or something like that, so that way you'll be able to see all of those and go back and find that information. But just be aware that they won't pop up brand new in your gosh, nobody uses RSS anymore. I don't know, whatever replaced RSS. If you're watching the OpenShift blog, they will be back in whenever we did the stream. All right, Johnny, is there any? I see chat coming in, so I don't know if there's any questions that we should.
Yep, there's one, and it's from Ashish, and he's asking, like, hey, when I'm deploying OpenShift on VMware, should we use the CNI or use VMware Nsxt?
Yeah, so I've just replied back to it. So you'll see me come up as VEducate, because that's the name of my blog post. So I've branded the YouTube account like that.
Gotcha.
So hopefully that's one of the areas we'll get time to touch on today. But I've already said to Andrew, I've got a lot of content that I can get through, but also more than happy to answer everyone's questions. So if we don't quite get through that today, then I'll come back for another session. But to give you a sneak preview of what I've got covered later, the answer obviously first depends on, do you have VMware Nsxt in your environment? Do you want your OpenShift environment to be part of the same overlay fabric as your virtual machines and consuming the same security sets? If the answer is yes, then you're going to be looking at the Nsxt functionality. If you're looking at using a open source high-speed CNI, which also gives you advanced network policy control outside of what you get with Kubernetes in the box, and this way you'd be looking at Andrea. And there is actually a way to consume Andrea with Nsxt today that we've just released as well. So again, as a customer, you've got the choice. And again, with things like Andrea, then you can use that regardless of the cloud that you deploy that into, whether it's your on-prem data center, whether it's AWS, Azure, whatever it may be.
Yeah, there's 4 and 4+ options just between Red Hat and VMware integration. So whether you want to use OpenShift SDN or OVN Kubernetes, right? Those are well documented by VMware, by Red Hat. So very much to Dean's point, it really comes down to use a Red Hat solution or a VMware solution of which one do you, or which feature set do you want to take advantage of? And I really like that Nsxt and Entria can now work together. I did not know that, and hearing that makes me very happy because that is a massively powerful combination.
And that's one of the demos I've got prepared in the background today to take you through some piece of that, about how essentially what we're going to look after is using Nsxt to extend that policy management control from your typical virtual machine estate, and then control Andrea with that as well.
Yeah. Our Hope 9, I see you pick the one your organization is more familiar with. That's an interesting stance. And the reason I say that is because a lot of times we encounter customers who it's the VMware team and the OpenShift team are decoupled. And, the OpenShift team is, they're largely unaware of what happens on the VMware side. And so they'll kind of default to something like OpenShift SDN or OVN Kubernetes, when in fact, for other parts of the organization, it may be more beneficial to use, the Nsxt or the Andrea integrations. The security team having, control, the VMware team and network team having visibility into what's happening inside of their, all kinds of other stuff. So in general, yes, I very much agree with you, Our Hope 9, right? Kind of whatever you're most comfortable with is kind of my default answer in many cases. But in this case, it may be worth communicating with your peers and other parts of the IT organization to find out what is the total best solution.
And Dean, I'm not sure if you caught the question, but there's another question that came in about VMware and OpenShift and the SRIOV from Podrick. He's asking if there's any specific integrations for VMware and OpenShift when it comes to the SRIOV operator.
So as it stands today, I believe that operator, is it produced by Red Hat today? I think it's an open source OpenShift one today. So the answer is no. It's not something we've worked on today. One of the things that you're probably going to learn is we've tried to make, where possible, all of our infrastructure integrations through operators, and then we started to certify them with Red Hat as well going forward. So we're slowly bringing that together as could probably allude to, in earlier editions of OpenShift. There's been obviously content produced by out of the box from Red Hat, from VMware, and then it's choosing the right one that works for your business. We're going to start aligning more closely with that. Again, this also relies on the feedback from yourselves, the customers, the people that are using this. The
Very
more
much.
you come back to us and tell us these are the integrations that you want, we can start to focus time on it. So one of the things that we do have is the IBM Joint Innovation Lab. So this is where we will work together and fund co-engineering. And again, I've got one of the examples of the outputs of that. And what we're expecting to see through the rest of 2022 is more of that joint innovation together.
Very much so. I'm curious as to whether or not, and I don't know the answer to this, despite sitting on several PM meetings around VMware integration. Whether or not we'll be able to see things like, better integration with those operators and the cloud provider that does machine provisioning. So that way we can request special, hardware, special features, special capabilities in that way. Today, I think you have to do it through machine sets. Basically, you have a machine set
Yes.
that requests an SR, a template that already has an SRIOV device or a vGPU device or whatever that happens to be. But one of the really cool things in my mind, and to be clear, as far as I know, this is not on the roadmap, and I'm already drafting the RFE in my head. Is like, hey, it would be great if I used this special resource operator or something like that to request that device. It could talk back to the infrastructure and figure out how
Yes.
to make that happen.
Yeah, so I think typically one of the questions that we get quite a lot is around GPU usage, because for many years I've been able to have a dedicated graphics card from your chosen provider out there, and you can add that to a virtual machine going forward. Once that's inside the virtual machine, how do you actually consume that within Kubernetes? Obviously, NVIDIA have been doing quite a lot of work around their AI piece, and with that then means they've put a big focus on Kubernetes with operators as well. So I don't think NVIDIA have drafted up, an exclusive documentation around the OpenShift piece yet. They're working on vSphere. So you can't quote me as definitely working, but I know it's one of the areas that they're looking into, and these kind of some of the strides that are going forward as well, where there will be other ways to consume this. Again, if we take a step back, if you look at VMware, one of the technologies that we have is something called Bitfusion. And Bitfusion essentially allows you to create a GPU farm, and then you consume that GPU farm through kind of a request software front end. So then you don't actually need to go through the same thing of thinking, oh, well, how do I design my virtual machine and add all of it in? You've got a farm of resources in your environment, and you call off to an API to consume that, and it gets attached dynamically inside of Kubernetes through those operators as well. And we're seeing customers now start to, go beyond that whole, hey, I've got some dedicated resource, dedicated hardware, and I want to develop some capabilities to know, okay, how do I productionize this and what does that look like? And we're now starting to see more adoption as the customers move into production, whereas in the last couple of years, especially from my personal experience, it was more just customers saying, hey, I'm okay having some dedicated hardware, that one GPU added, because I don't care if it dies, I'm developing stuff. I'm not trying to productionize this yet.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting you bring up Bitfusion. I was asked last week about whether or not we support Bitfusion, and I don't know the answer to that, so that'll be an interesting one. So I'm going to pause on the questions for just a moment. I want to hit our top of mind topics real quick, just because most of them are kind of follow ups from last week. So I want to make sure that we go ahead and address those. But don't let that keep you all from submitting those questions. We'll keep track of those. We'll answer as many as we can. If we happen to miss any of them, please don't be afraid to bring it up, to poke us again. So top of mind topics. So following up from last week, we talked about how to troubleshoot operator updates, like what's happening if an update is stalled, or what happens if it's failing. Remember, everything with an update and with an OpenShift deployment in general is controlled via operator. So really what you want to focus on there is troubleshooting the operators themselves. And let me find the right. So I'm going to post 2 links into the chat here. So these 2 links have, one is the documentation, one is a KCS article. And they describe, how to do some of that troubleshooting, where to look, some things to investigate when it comes to that. I think I posted it in the right place. Yeah. So just a continuation from last week, I did include those links into the blog post. Again, that blog post should be going out either later today or tomorrow, first thing. So the other thing that we were asked about, and I don't remember if this came up on the stream, but somebody sent me an email about it, and that is developer entitlements. So yes, if you look in the infamous Appendix 1 to the Red Hat license agreements, OpenShift is included with the developer entitlements that you get with a developer account, right? So, back with the whole CentOS thing, when that changed to CentOS Stream and we changed the way the entitlements work, right? You now get 16 RHEL entitlements with a developer account. You also get 16 cores of OpenShift. The issue thus far has been that you can't, if you go into console.redhat.com and you try and entitle that cluster with that, the entitlements don't show up. So I've been told, we first started investigating, I was told it was fixed. It wasn't fixed. I was told it was fixed. It wasn't fixed. So we're kind of going round and round and round. But we'll get that fixed. Just know that if you do leverage, right, if you are wanting to entitle a cluster like that, you can continue past the 60-day trial. Console.redhat.com won't be pretty, if you will, but none of the functionality will stop working, if you will. So you can continue to do that. If for whatever some reason somebody comes knocking at your door like, hey, why haven't you entitled this OpenShift cluster? I think it would probably be safe to say, well, I'm using the developer entitlement. It's just not available. I can't click the button in there. But I'm hoping that will get resolved in the not too distant future. And let's see, what was the other things that I wanted to bring up? Oh, kind of the last one. Actually, for Johnny and Dean who are looking here, I have another one about vCenter, but we can talk about that in a minute. So the last one I wanted to talk about is something that I guess not too many folks were aware of, and that is so with the global poll secret. Right? So when you go and deploy an OpenShift cluster, you provided a poll secret. And that poll secret is configured as the global poll secret. So it's available to all projects, all users. Anytime it does a poll, it uses that secret to, for example, pull images from Quay or wherever they happen to be. If you're doing that disconnected, that poll secret would have the credentials for your disconnected registry instance if you are using them, for example. But you can extend that global poll secret to have credentials for other registries. So maybe, for example, you're using the docker.io registry, Docker Hub. And, of course, without authentication, Docker throttles your polls. So maybe you have an organization account or something like that you want it to use, so that way you can remove that throttling, as opposed to doing it on a per project or per user basis, where maybe you have higher thresholds but still get throttled on occasion. So you just add those credentials in there. Here, I'll post that documentation link into here. I'm posting these onto YouTube. I don't know if they're also showing up in I don't know if they're also showing up on here. I don't see them showing up on my here, I'll post them. I see them in YouTube, but I don't see them on Twitch, and I don't see them in Restream. So I don't know what's going on there. All right, there's the updating global poll secret on Twitch. And then here is KCS. And here is the docs on operator troubleshooting. So just to make sure, just to be doubly redundantly sure. All right. Yeah, we can't see them, Ashish. Thank you. Oh, you can't see them on YouTube. I see you're responding on YouTube. That's strange.
Yeah, so I can see them coming into YouTube through the Restream bot now, so they should crop up there.
Strange. Okay. Well, I guess I'll use Twitch to do my posting. Good to know.
Gotta love technology.
Yeah, and apparently it's just one of those days with technology. Google has been a bit wonky for me today. Red Hat uses Google services, and like GChat was being very slow to load threads, and stuff like that. So I don't know. We won't dwell on it. Okay, so that was all the top of mind topics that I had. So I definitely I want to prioritize questions from the audience, but at the same time, Dean, I know there's a lot of stuff that we want to talk about to kind of lean folks towards some of the newer things that are coming out, some of the newer things that we're working on. So what I would like to do is, Dean, if you would like to talk about in particular, I think the Antria integration is one that folks are interested in. And we can also we can also talk about any kind of high level best practices, common things that we see, and we'll just answer questions as they come in. We'll try and answer them in the chat, and then we'll bring them up we'll also bring them up verbally when we have a chance. So
yeah. So I think there's two questions that are outstanding. So the first one's, what about OpenShift virtualization sat on VMware? For this one, I'll be honest with you, I don't think it makes sense. And the reason for that is very simple. OpenShift virtualization, I think, is built for KVM, right? So it's how to consume the KVM layer for VMs. Well, essentially, then what you're trying to do is build a virtual machine layer to put another virtual machine in it on top of VMware. That doesn't make sense.
correct.
So if you want to consume your virtual machines side by side, then you've already got that with VMware through vCenter and through any other operational tooling that you've brought up with it. There's another question about when will nested networking be supported on VMware.
Dean, if you don't mind me pausing, I'll expand on the OpenShift virtualization quick. So to your point, and you're 100% accurate, OpenShift virtualization is itself a virtualization solution. So having nested virtualization doesn't really make sense. One, it's basically impossible to support because there's two hypervisor layers there that you don't know what the other one is doing, et cetera, right? Even VMware, I don't think VMware officially supports nested vSphere on vSphere. It works, and I know a lot of us use it in our home labs, myself included. But I don't think it's one of those, like, if you're a corporate customer who, like, I'm rolling this into production, they're going to be like, wait a minute, I think. And that's true of Red Hat with KVM as well.
Yes.
So the use case there when we talk about OpenShift virtualization is often I'm deploying applications in containers, but I have some virtualized component that I'm dependent on. And especially if you're coming from Rev or OpenStack or something like that, maybe it makes sense to keep those KVM-based virtual machines there. If you're doing that with VMware, then you kind of have a choice of, do I use something like the Nsxt integration? So that way my VMs and my pods can be on the same SDN. And you kind of achieve the same sort of thing, right? They can do that native communication. They can talk to each other without additional abstractions. So it's definitely one of those, what's your use case? What are you trying to do? Application modernization is a big one when it comes to that. I know VMware's been doing some pretty cool work with the supervisor cluster and the ability to do things like provision virtual machines using a Kubernetes API. And Dean, help me out here with what that's called. It's the is it just the virtual machine API or virtual machine provider, something like that?
Yes, yeah. So we have we call it virtual machine service, and essentially through our own runtime, we've got an ability to speak to that API and basically spin up a virtual machine at the same place. But essentially, when you go under the hood there of what we're doing with that virtual machine, it's being created the same way. If you right-click create virtual machine, it's just the interface in which you drive to do that. So whether or not that changes and we bring in, OpenShift in the future, that OpenShift can call out create a virtual machine on its own as well. It remains to be seen. Obviously, OpenShift or Red Hat found a way to do that as part of their Bootstrap as the install for when you clone virtual machines and push the images and so forth, but not as kind of like maybe a day 3 action when the app player.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting one to see as well. I don't know if that's on the roadmap or not, because right now we use the standard vCenter API, actually abstracted through Terraform. To do those VM provisioning. So that'll be an interesting one to see. So sorry, I know I distracted us there, but ultimately it's one of those, depending on your use case, depending on what you're doing with your application, one, the other, or both may be the right answer. So definitely talk. You can always reach out to me, andrew.sullivan@redhat.com. Happy to help answer those questions. And of course, your Red Hat and VMware account teams. So the other question, when will nested networking be supported on VMware, from Khalid?
Yeah, so I'm not sure I fully understand that question because obviously if we're talking around using CNI, it's kind of like almost nested networking at the Kubernetes platform layer, and then you've got the underlying networking of the VMware estate. Well, we obviously support that today through various integrations. So if you're going to stand up Kubernetes, use Flannel, that's supported. If you're going to use OVS, that's supported. If you use OpenShift SDN, that's supported. Obviously, today I'm going to talk a little bit more about the networking side of things. So I'm going to share my screen for now. I'm going to give everyone a quick preview of what I have ready. And then I've moved the slides around so we can start maybe jumping into some of those networking discussions. So for anyone that wants to follow me today, you can find me on Twitter. I'm Saint DLE, and you can always drop a message in the chat if you can't find me on Twitter. What I put together today is kind of just an overview of OpenShift together with VMware. Looking from an infrastructure up point of view, where do we fit together? Obviously, we've already started talking about common practice and issues. Talk a little bit about consuming that underlying vSphere storage with OpenShift. We do see a lot of customers bring separate storage arrays to their Kubernetes platform, but then we're also starting to see, especially with customers who've got vSAN in place, which is the storage level at the hypervisor, they want to consume that as well. Obviously, networking, so how to integrate with the various VMware networking components, and then infrastructure up monitoring. So where does the cloud management suite from VMware sit in there as well? And then there's a whole host of other kind of pieces from VMware that I've ignored for today. So I just want to start off with a little bit of a top level down to give everyone a bit of a baseline. And again, it might generate some more questions for us to answer today. I'm going to do this through the viewpoint of what's called VMware Cloud Foundation. VMware Cloud Foundation essentially is our software-defined data center solution where we bring the majority of our VMware products together in an easy-to-deploy package, which is easy to manage, centralized, backed by infrastructure automation and so forth as well. But I just want to do it from that point of view because you get a lot of the products that then integrate with OpenShift running on top of it as your container platform. So the first one, from a compute point of view, we always get asked straight away, is OpenShift supported on VMware? Well, of course, the answer is yes, it has been for many years. And that's from both the VMware side of the house, and that's also from the Red Hat side of the house. And that's seen by our joint documentation. From a VMware point of view, we have reference architecture in our VMware validated designs, which are just going under a slight rebranding at the moment to VMware validated solutions. You can also see, designs for VMware Cloud Foundation. For if we go into a little bit more depth around, the hardware you choose, VMware with Dell VxRail, for example, as well as design guides. Second piece, vMotion. I always get asked this: is vMotion supported? Yes, it is. It now actually appears in the OpenShift installation documentation. Just to avoid confusion, there is also a feature called storage vMotion.
Thank you for highlighting that, Dean.
And that's where the underlying storage for the data store or the LUN that it sits on that supports that virtual machine. So it's install disk and any auxiliary disk. Storage vMotion allows you to move that between data stores, between LUNs on your array. That is not supported from OpenShift from Red Hat, and actually we don't support it either for our runtime.
And I think I know why, and it's because in the early days, we Red Hat we didn't do ourselves any favor by not directly answering the question of is vMotion supported. Like the docs were kind of ambiguous, the KCSs out there were ambiguous, and it was one of those. I think at one point we were even saying like, yes, it's supported, but we don't encourage it or we don't recommend it and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it's one of those like. There is a lot of nuance behind that and a lot of other things that are going on. And I think even today, if you go and you search in the KCS, certainly for employees, because I don't know if the in progress or the non-certified ones show up for everybody, you'll find there's a KCS out there that says like, vMotion might cause a virtual machine, a OpenShift node to show up in a non-responding state or something like that.
Yep.
And the point of that KCS is basically vMotion is fully supported, but occasionally you might find this error or you might find this issue. And if you do, here's how to fix it. And what the Splat folks have told me, which is our, what does Splat stand for now? Special platform team or specific platform team. They're the folks who like, Dean, you probably know Richard and Joe, and like they focus on VMware. And what they tell me is basically it's like if a vMotion fails or if something happens where like the bandwidth, basically the vMotion takes a long time, where the VM is stunned for, especially a control plane VM is stunned for a long time, then that type of scenario can happen. But if it's just, day-to-day normal, doing the standard VMware, put the node in maintenance mode or DRS doing its thing, there's basically no risk there. And worst thing that happens is the node goes unresponsive. The KCS tells you how to kick kubelet and basically have it begin responding again. But yeah, vMotion absolutely supported. Storage vMotion is the one that you got to look out for, because it causes the connection between the VMDK and the data store and the PV object to become disconnected. So it loses track of where the VMDK is at, and then it can't mount it, of course.
Yeah, and for those of you that are using the older vSphere versions as well, I really recommend that you look at vSphere 7, especially in production estates. And the reason for that is we put a lot of technical work into I won't say refactoring, but kind of pushing vMotion to the next level where we can do sub-millisecond migrations. We have better support for high latency workloads and so forth. Again, those maximums that we support increase massively. And although I haven't prepared it for today, we do have some information as well around the performance gains where we've moved like a massive SAP system virtual machine from one node to another on, the older versions of vSphere to now. And, the difference is tremendous at those larger node sizes. So it comes back down to running anything on top of virtualization. Just be aware of the typical characteristics. vMotion, there is a stun operation there when it flips that memory and CPU usage over from one host to the other. That's always going to be there because of how virtualization works. Those are typical when people run into issues, which then manifests itself in your platform or application. As Andrew said, you may get a node not responding within the Kubernetes service, and that's because it's been stunned for a couple of seconds. So yeah,
another words are hard. Another reason to use vSphere 7. So with the CSI provisioner, there's a lot of really good information that gets surfaced up into vCenter about the PVCs as well. So if you're kind of a dual hat, right? If you're a both the OpenShift and the VMware admin, or if you work closely with them, troubleshooting, all that type of stuff, that information is really, really helpful.
Yeah. So if we go back to the slide, so I'll take everyone through the rest of kind of some of the areas. So we've got that cloud provider support. So you do have the ability to scale your OpenShift cluster and manage the resource usage of the virtual machines that have been deployed that become your OpenShift nodes through machines. So you can edit those machine sets, you can scale them up, scale them down. You can create new machine sets, and I think it's machine groups, is it? I think OpenShift call it, which is how then to deploy different types of nodes within your environment at different sizes. I will check that in the background if I can. So you do have control there. Obviously, that's slightly different to that whole, if I'm interfacing with OpenShift, can I deploy a standalone virtual machine that I can deploy, I don't know, CentOS and Jenkins into it, for example, that isn't containerized. Moving on, so from networking point of view, so we support integrating with Nsxt. We do that both from our network container plugin. This is our NSX native, so this is bringing it into part of the same overlay that is going to be used by your host systems and your virtual machines that live on top of them hosts. Or we can bring Antrea, so you can use Antrea as a standalone component just inside your cluster on its own. But then you can also manage that as part of NSXT, so your network admins get full visibility into that environment as well. But you can still use that high performance CNI with the policy management as well. And then from a monitoring point of view, and I think this one's kind of really key and it kind of always gets left out, right? We have full stack monitoring in vRealize operations through our Kubernetes management pack. That gives you that next step beyond a virtual machine. So straight away, if you deploy OpenShift on top of vSphere and monitor it with vRealize operations, you can see that virtual machine come up in vRealize operations, which is great. But I speak to lots of customers whereby the Kubernetes guys ring up, hey, this pod isn't working. I think it's your virtualization platform. I need it fixed. And the virtualization guys go, hey, what's a pod? And the guys go, well, it's a service that runs inside of my set of virtual machines. And they go, okay, how many virtual machines have you got? Lots. Where's the pod run? Could be anywhere. And it takes us into that next step where we can go inside the environment. We can see the Kubernetes, we can see the pods, the services, the API, and then we can also link that back to the vSphere estate. So we can go right from which PVs are then consuming the underlying VMDKs as well through vSphere. It's really good for troubleshooting, and it makes it all searchable as well. So it's the kind of next bringing together. And then the final piece is we have our own login product called vRealize login side. And again, we can collect those logs out of FluentD, and we've got some unique characteristics versus some of the other products that are out there as well, and how we visualize data as well. So again, if you were using that within your environment, we can also bring those logs across as well.
And Dean, I should probably know this. With the vRealize log insight integration, that is not dependent on the OpenShift logging service being deployed. So you can deploy both, but I don't think you're required to deploy.
So you're not required to deploy both. However, I worked with some of the Red Hat team around this about getting. There's a Red Hat blog post that I helped co-write around this. It's easier if you use the cluster logging and just deploy FluentD through the cluster logging. And it's a very simple reason for that. It's because of that system OpenShift logging namespace that's created with the right permissions out of the box. Because, of course, if to get audit logs and so forth, you need host level permission. Host access permissions inside of the cluster. If you go alone and deploy FluentD on its own, it's not going to have the right level of permissions through the security context to access the data, which then means there's a lot more work for you to set all of that up. So again, it's kind of a which way do you want to go about it? But again, inside of the cluster logging, you've got the ability to control how much of the product you deploy, because it comes with things like Kibana and Elasticsearch and stuff like that. And you don't need those components if you don't want to use them.
Makes sense. So basically you can basically configure OpenShift logging to forward over to vRealize log insight instead of using the locally deployed Kibana, Elasticsearch, etc.
Yes.
So are you at a point where you want to address some questions?
So I think Johnny's been keeping track of some of the questions for me, so thank you very much. So I know a couple of the community have been answering these questions well, so thank you very much. One of the questions that came through was, what kind of performances may we face at application level when running containers on top of OpenShift on VMware? And the answer from that point of view is it's negligible. There is going to be a slight performance impact because, again, you're going through that hypervisor layer through, it's not consuming the resources of bare metal. But then there's a number of reports and the same things apply. What's the performance impact if I do virtual machines versus bare metal? The same things apply. It's very negligible, but then you also get better resource management as a whole. So the number of customers for many years that we've all turned up to that have virtualized their estate versus bare metal was massive, because they'd have Exchange servers with 364 gig of RAM sat in them that weren't consuming it, and SQL servers and so forth. And now you can scale and grow as you need. From an availability point of view as well, you also get some additional benefits. So if a host goes down, vSphere will manage that high availability event and power on the virtual machine. And in some instances, in some of the testing that I've been doing internally with a colleague, we actually found that vSphere was powering on and bringing the virtual machine back online in the Kubernetes node before Kubernetes had reconciled and realized the node was offline. Now, admittedly, this was when we were testing vanilla Kubernetes, because we were just playing about with a couple of Ubuntu machines. But again, kind of what we were seeing there is the vSphere layer was actually giving us availability that we were struggling to adopt inside of Kubernetes itself out of the box.
Yeah, and the expected behavior there is essentially, so the physical node fails, it takes down the OpenShift node. vSphere HA returns that OpenShift node to service, and then, so basically there's no point where Kubernetes, where OpenShift declares the node is not ready. But what'll happen is it'll notice all these pods are gone. like I thought they were there, they're no longer there. So then it'll go through the rescheduling and it'll immediately begin to reschedule all of that workload and then spin back up. So as opposed to if you go through the normal, Kubernetes waits, I think it's 5 minutes before it declares the node unreachable and then will reschedule that workload. So you're kind of, yes, all the workload has to restart. It's not like it, magically comes back in the exact same state it was, but it happens in a much faster process.
Yeah.
So one of the other questions I saw here, and I think it was a Shish, is it possible to have an OpenShift cluster installed on VMware on AWS Cloud or Azure Cloud, so VMC? So the answer is yes, absolutely. Definitely with AWS. I don't think we've added support for Azure yet.
So EMC is in the documentation because I helped write that one. So that's fully supported. From a AVS point of view, it's just another VMware environment. It's just managed by Microsoft. That's the only difference. So from that point of view, the supportability should be the same. I do know there's work going on in the background to have a more official statement on that going forward as well. So you'll probably see that in the next couple of months come out. But essentially, from a technical point of view, how to consume it, pretty much the same because it's just another VMware platform.
Yeah, because I know that we specifically test like every OpenShift build is done with VMC. So on VMware on AWS. So while VMware on Azure is just another VMware environment because it's not specifically tested, we consider it a non-tested deployment. So the KCS I just posted in the chat covers any kind of support caveats there. Which is more or less it's supported, but if we suspect it may be because you're on a non-tested platform, we might, want you to recreate that issue on a supported platform.
Yeah. So I think there's another question there that kind of links into a little bit of some of the compute side of it about availability zone concepts map into vSphere availability concepts. So what would a 3-zone architecture look like? So first and foremost, I think one of the things you have to kind of understand about the virtualization platform there is the cloud provider will bring through so many details into the environment, but some of the things don't quite map. So in terms of if you're using distributed resource scheduler, which is where VMware moves your virtual machines around to where it thinks they're best placed, always set up some affinity rules to make sure that not all of your control plane nodes are sat on the same host straight away. Because if that host goes offline, you've lost your control plane. And the same again for your compute plane nodes. When we talk about storage, we deploy something called the cloud provider interface, but it's from VMware at the vSphere level as well. And essentially that gives us an insight of what's going on at the vSphere level. And then that allows us from a storage control point of view, understand how to map those VMDKs to the virtual machine as well. So you can set up a topology from that point of view. But I will call out now that if you're using the integration for storage, we don't support stretch clusters at the moment. And that is obviously because you have a bit of a chicken and the egg scenario where that data lives. If you're doing it over the stretch itself and something goes offline, then it can cause problems that you don't really want in terms of attaching and managing persistent volumes inside your Kubernetes environment.
Yeah. So a couple of things to be aware of there. So you said affinity / anti-affinity rules. So unfortunately, that's not something that we do automated fashion. So it's a day 2 outside of OpenShift thing that needs to be configured. I think there's an RFE for that, but I don't know the status of that. I would have to go and check on it. So just be aware. Yes, I would definitely encourage everyone, especially for control plane nodes, go and configure anti-affinity on those, soft anti-affinity on those. So that way you can prevent a single physical node failure from, crippling your OpenShift cluster. So with regard to, we don't support multi vCenter today. So you can't have a single UPI or IPI cluster, so one with the cloud provider integration, deployed across multiple vCenters. And multi-DRS cluster is a little, I'll say, strange. So with UPI, it's fine. You're manually deploying those nodes. It basically works exactly as expected. The thing to be aware of is whatever data store is being used for PVCs, you want that to be accessible to all nodes that OpenShift compute nodes will be hosted on. If you're using IPI, there was some bugs that were found. I think they were found in the upstream VMware provider. And I say bug, I think it was actually working the way it was intended, but we consider it a bug because you have to put the credentials into the vSphere.conf. So they're basically plain text credentials that are stored on the file system of the host. But I saw recently that there is some progress on that. One of our folks had opened a pull request. So I saw that there's some progress on that. So hopefully that'll get addressed. But so it's one of those, like it works, but there's just an asterisk there to be aware of. Yeah, that was all I had to say there.
No problem. So I can see we're kind of burning through this time with all the questions, which is fantastic because I was really worried. I was worried because I know people say, "Oh, the VMware one's always lots of questions." But I thought I might turn up today. They hear my English accent, and everyone just goes, "Nope, not interested." But if everyone can give me a couple of minutes, then maybe we just go through a couple more of the slides and just talk a little bit more in depth about the networking piece because there were a few questions on that. If that's okay.
Yeah, please do.
Oh, so I have one last animation on this one on the slide first of all, which is around automation. So this comes up quite a lot as well about how to use vRealize automation and typically around the deployment stuff. So as it stands today, we don't really have a native integration dedicated to OpenShift, but what we do have is we integrate with any conformant Kubernetes platforms to provide self-service capabilities and continuous integration and deliver it via infrastructure pipelines. And for those of you that want to go to my blog at theeducate.co.uk, I've done a blog post on how to use VRA pipelines to deploy an OpenShift cluster using IPI. And essentially that's because I'm using a concept of tasks in there, which is the same as if I'm doing it from my laptop. I'm in the background, just as me messing around, I'm going to kind of build that out a little bit more about how you use VRA to do that with, because essentially it's fully extensible. So if you think about it, you can build it. It's just we don't have that kind of native integration to one click say, hey, deploy me the concept of an OpenShift cluster from there. Whether or not that comes in the roadmap in the future, I'm unsure of at the moment. But again, any questions, queries, please reach out to me and I'm happy to kind of take that a little bit further. So networking with VMware. So we're going to have a quick look at kind of Nsxt, Antrea, and a little bit on NSX Advanced Load Balancer, which is also known as Avi Networks. Although I think we purchased them around 2 years ago now, it's just the name sticks. So the first one is VMware's connectivity portfolio. And I don't even think this is the full part because we leave SD1 out here. So there's a number of areas that will fit into the modern app space around containers and Kubernetes as well. And pretty much I think the majority of these are actually supported with your OpenShift environments today as well. I'm going to focus on mainly these points, which is the virtual network infrastructure itself. And we'll touch a little bit on that ingress load balancing as well. But again, if people want to kind of hear more about some of these areas, I can come back again if you protest Andrew for me. So there's two main CNI offerings from VMware. There is two CNI offerings. There's the NCP, which is the network container plugin, and there's Project Antrea, or just Antrea now. So the NCP, as I mentioned already, answering some of the questions, all workloads are connected directly to the Nsxt data plane. That means they become part of the overlay with the rest of the virtualization estate. The policy is managed and enforced by NSX, so you've got things like IDS, IPS, distributed firewall ruling, firewall rules. There we go. My words aren't working as well there. That allows us granular control. So with inside of NSX, we can set firewall rules that allows us to, within a namespace, which is obviously a set of isolation itself, do pod-to-pod networking, and we can also limit that pod-to-pod networking as well. We've got Project Antrea. So your VMs themselves, you've got NSX in place already, are just going to be part of the overlay of NSX. Antrea itself is going to be within the clusters itself, and these can be multiple clusters regardless of where you deploy them, as per the orange box there. You can bring Antrea into the management plane of NSX as well, so that you can use NSX to still centrally set those policies as well. But you can also use control those policies at an application level. So when you're deploying your YAML into your Kubernetes cluster, you can then start to set policies in place that say, hey, this is what I want my firewall rules to look like for this environment. So you've got a number of ways to consume that, and I've got another slide that takes you through a little bit of that. Differentiating the two plugins, key capabilities. So NCP is mentioned across your full networking stack. You're going to get the ability to do routing, NAT per namespace, no NAT, source NAT, so forth. Security policies, which is where we start to overlap a little bit with the Antrea capabilities as well. And within NSX, we've got load balancing as well, so you've got that included. You've then got end-to-end network visibility through the NSX manager itself, so you can do things like trace flows and troubleshooting. And essentially, the biggest benefit there is it becomes a single pane of glass across your full networking stack. we integrate obviously with our own environments. We have operators available to make it easy to consume on cluster bootstrap and bring up for OpenShift as well. So we make that really easy to consume from that point of view. From an Andrea point of view, this slide wasn't supposed to be that. I think I rebuilt this slide to look like this. So I apologize for that. I forgot to hide it. So Andrea is an open source CNCF sandbox project. It provides pod connectivity and network policy enforcement. It uses Open vSwitch under the hood. And basically its focus at a project level is around simplification, usability, and diagnostics at a networking level, use on any cloud platform where you run your container environment on, and then obviously gives you that extra control and feature set around security policies, scaling performance. You can interact with us through the community that we go through, whereas obviously the NCP is contained within our product because it's in-house IP that we build ourselves. In terms of its architecture overall, so we have an Andrea agent which manages the pod interfaces and builds the overlay tunnels. We've obviously got that Andrea controller, which basically centralizes all of that and looks after the custom resource definitions and manages the reconciliation of them when they're created. And at a policy point of view, as mentioned, we use the Open vSwitch as the data plane across your cluster, and this is built from the Kubernetes side up as well. In terms of what does that give you, because the focus really for Andrea is around high performance and the policy management. On the left here, we have the limited availability of Kubernetes network policies out of the box. I think OpenShift gives you a little bit extra controls because OpenShift has the ability to do its own ingress through OC routes, for example. So a little bit extra control there as well. With Andrea, essentially, you get the ability to do cluster network policies at a global layer. It also introduces this concept of tiering as well when you set those network policy rules. What does that tiering model look like? So we basically build it on a 7-layer emergency, security ops, network ops, blah, 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 as you can see in front of you. And then you've got the ability to place rules in place. And these obviously are set in an order of precedence as well. This slide hopefully makes it a little bit more consumable, which is how do I use these different tiers? Well, if you're a network admin or a VI admin or a security admin, you're going to be using some of these higher, more precedent setting tiers, whereas you've then got particular tiers that are going to be used by your platform and application consumers themselves. So that means when they deploy an application, they can set their own custom resource definition for that policy in place as they want. But there is other precedents in place for, baseline security by your team as well. Then the last piece to bring that together, if you're already using NSX within your environment, is you can centralize that management between clusters. So you're not actually sharing the overlay between clusters, but you're sharing that management plane between clusters with NSX. And again, those same administrators can configure at an NSX level rather than having to go down to a per cluster level for those pieces.
Yeah, that's really cool because it gives you that global view, even if you're, deploying multiple clusters for your application, maybe it's, dev, test, prod, or whatever. Gives you that global view, that global control across all of that.
Yeah, so I think this was kind of the last slide, which is just a little bit more of a high-level architecture diagram of how it works under the hood. But I think we've got a little bit of time just to go into a demo, so I'm going to stop sharing this screen. I'm going to find my right terminal window for the time being.
So if you can multitask for a moment, we'll ask a couple of questions. So from Daniel, is NSXT only supported or NSXV is also?
We don't support NSXV for these integrations. And the reason for that's very simple. So NSXV was our original VMware software-defined networking solution. When we brought NSXT into the market, it was something that we redesigned from the ground up and rethought about how we wanted to do software-defined networking. And then there was a kind of a date a while ago where we started to put all of our features engineering capabilities into NSXT going forward. If you're using NSXV within your environment today, we do still support that for those customers, but we encourage you to move to NSXT for all of these new features.
Yeah. And apologies in advance if I butcher anybody's name. Johnny knows I'm terrible with names. Padraig, is there support for DPDK Open vSwitch with Andrea?
So that is something I don't know, to be completely honest with you. But that is a really good question. If you go to the Antrea open source project on GitHub and just drop that into either discussions or open it up as an issue as a query, then someone from the team will get back and answer that to you. I don't think it's actually covered in the documentation off the top of my head, so it's something I have to really dig into from a technicalities point of view for it.
And then while you're finishing bringing that up, I'll quickly address Robert, who was commenting about stretch clusters across two sites. So this is, we talked about this during the I think it was the DR stream, where a single cluster across two sites really doesn't give you increased availability, benefits, because effectively one of those sites is always going to be off balance, right? It's always going to have the majority of the control plane nodes. So the solution from a Red Hat perspective has always been to recommend effectively two clusters, one at each site, and then either having an active or an active passive type of application deployment. And what that precisely looks like depends on the application and infrastructure of services that are available, stuff like that. But spanning it across that cluster, while it's not unsupported, we generally discourage it. I'll also add that we've got one of the essays, and I have been working together on a blog post. So we'll hopefully get a blog post about that soon, as well as next week we'll be joined by Annette Cluett to talk about the DR capabilities with ACM and ODF. So if you haven't already subscribed, if you're not, kind of getting those alerts or scheduled to subscribe to our calendar, if not the YouTube or Twitch channel, please go ahead and do that, because then you'll get an alert for all of those different topics as they come up. All right, go ahead, Dean, please. I'm excited to see this demo. I haven't seen it yet.
No problem. Okay, so if the controller brings up my terminal window that I shared, perfect. So the first things first is, I'm not going to go through the full ins and outs of the Bootstrap, but we support this through IPI and UPI for an installation. And we start off, of course, by configuring this inside of the install config file that we use as well. And it's really simple. We set the networking type as Antrea, and then we set our various cluster networks that we're interested in using. Now, of course, behind the scenes, we need to do a little bit more work on that as well. So when you download the operator itself inside the deployment folder, we have a number of manifests in there. So even if you're using the IPI installation, you are going to have to do OpenShift-install create manifests, copy these files across, and then you can continue with the rest of the installation, and the OpenShift packaging will package all of that together and then install that where it is. And of course, we do support things like being able to do this in an air-gap environment. If you pull the container down and host it in your own image registry as well, you would just change that inside of these YAML files from that point of view. In terms of integrating with Nsxt, we also can do this on Bootstrap as well. You pull the files down for this, I believe, from our VMware website. So you would have to already have a license or a trial available for Nsxt for that component as well, because again, you're using kind of the Nsxt enterprise product for this piece. There's a little bit of a difference there. So again, we have a Bootstrap and an operator that brings, Bootstrap today. We don't have an operator for those pods that are deployed during the Bootstrap today that, to bring that up with. So unfortunately, it does mean, and anyone that tried to do the Nsxt integration previously probably see this, we do have to do a podman load manually on each of the host nodes that are brought up, so that we can get that bootstrapped at the same time as well. I've spoken to the team. We are going to improve that process going forward in the future. It's just kind of the way that it is at the moment.
Well, I would assume that because it's the SDN, it happens before even things like OLM have been deployed. So having an operator it is kind of precluded there.
Yeah, exactly that. So essentially, we need to get in as it's being brought up for everything in the environment. And if you're integrating to the Nsxt, then there's potentially policy management that you want to take advantage of straight away as well when that's been brought up. So again, we've got a simple script for this. There is a little bit of work there when you do this. Typically, what I used to do in my older environments is I'd bring up just my master nodes, and then the worker nodes would follow along suit in the future anyway. So that was easier to do. So it kind of feels a bit more like a UPI install from that point of view, unfortunately. Again, we are working on bringing that into the operator as well in the future potentially, so that we can make that easier for people to consume. So let's move away from, obviously, we've created, we've bootstrapped to brought everything up. So I'm just going to show you very quickly. I've got a test application that I've deployed. It's a typical web cart application itself. I was playing about earlier, unfortunately, so I've got a few things that are dying there as well. But the main thing here is we've got a front end we're going to connect to, and that's available through our load balancer. And then that front end speaks to a number of different services, including one of our payment services in the background. So I'm just going to reshare my screen now, and I'm going to go to the Nsxt environment in a second. So that has just helpfully timed me out from logging. I was looking at it, I was like, oh, it's still logged in, brilliant. So you can see I've got a number of tabs open because I'm so excited to show everything to you today. So the first thing I'm going to show you straight away is we've bootstrapped, we've brought the Entreya into Nsxt itself. And straight away, if I go to inventory, I go to containers, I can see all of my OpenShift environment as a Kubernetes type through the Entreya CNI as well. So I can see the namespace, I can see how many pods are running in there, I can see the internetwork, I can see any labels that are brought through from Kubernetes. And that's really important because those Kubernetes labels are brought through and translated into Nsxt labels so that we can identify based on labels rather than based on deployments itself. If I just click onto clusters there, again, similar type of view, but we can see where it is, what the infrastructure is. Again, we obviously support bringing into control. If you deploy a environment into AWS and use Entreya as your networking again, you can still manage that through Nsxt as well. Next thing that we want to then start thinking about, so I'll show you my application. So it's very simple. We go to buy, we add it into the cart, I can place an order, and then it does a dummy order in the background. I go to the security tab and I go to my distributed firewall. This is where I can set pod-to-pod networking inside of a namespace. So I made this slightly easier for myself earlier today because I've basically set this up in the background. But essentially, I've set a destination. I've set the destination as payment services. But if I click into this, let's see how we get that. Straight away, I can see an affected members list. And because I've got two separate Kubernetes clusters involved here, I'm actually pulling them both through. And there's a very simple reason for that. Because I've set the group definition, how do I find my pods that I want to affect? I'm just doing it by a very simple tag. Now, here I've made this very generic. So I'm pulling through the tag of payment service, and this then brings pods in from different Kubernetes clusters. If I want it just from my OpenShift cluster, I'd add another tag in there to say, well, OpenShift environment has to be OpenShift, for example, to make that more granular. But as you can see, very quickly, I can build that up based on criteria. Obviously, I'm denying the service to anything just to break it straight away. I'm going to set that to reject. I'm going to publish this, and we'll see it kind of just go in the background, start to update the firewall. And if I go through my hipster app again, and I try and buy the typewriter this time, I add it to the cart, and I place my order, we can now see it start to hang. So whilst I wait for that to time out through the application, let's have a look at some of the troubleshooting features. So if I go to plan and troubleshooting stage, I can go down to traffic analysts. And this one has been the great things of Nsxt for many years. I personally think when I was a consumer of these products myself, was kind of the trace flow was really cool. But if I click on getting started with the trace flow, I can do all my trace flow of my usual Nsxt environment, but I've also got this Entreya trace flow as well. So now I'm going to select my cluster, I'm going to select my OpenShift environment, and I'm going to select and say, I want my pod, which was my front end, and my destination was obviously connecting back to the payment service to process that payment. So I'm going to go to that payment service and I'm going to click trace. Because we know there's a problem there. It's a man-made problem. And straight away, I can see very easily it's dropped by the cluster policy. So that's what we expected, to be fair. But we've got that level of visibility within Nsxt straight away, thanks to Entreya. I'm going to go back to my security rules. I'm going to undo that change, and I'm going to allow the traffic again. I publish that, and actually if I go to my hipster shop as that's going, you'll see as well, I've got an internal service error, and we can see there that it can't connect to the background pod that it needs to write to, unfortunately. if I go back to this interface, if I change that, it'll say success. If I go back to plan and troubleshoot, back to here, if I just click retrace now, and let it proceed, we're obviously going to see that actually we expect this to fully go ahead, and it takes me through that full flow of data. Now, obviously, this map will get bigger and more interesting if we did this outside of the namespace, outside of that isolation zone, so we're between namespaces or even between Kubernetes clusters, or from a virtual machine on our network into our Kubernetes environment as well. So you've got a lot of visibility control from that point of view. If you didn't want to bring in the Nsxt component to manage this with, obviously, we've been talking over and over about the policy control point of view. So I'm just going to show you some of the documentation from the Entrea point of view. We've got this cluster network policy resource that's created. So there's a custom resource definition when you install it. And then it's very easy. You just specify your YAML files, and you've got a number of options there about how you match pods based on label selectors and so forth, then setting ingress and egress, and how do you want to deal with that traffic, again, through port-based, through IP blocks, through pod services, through matching labels, whatever it may be. And within our documentation, we've got a number of examples there as well to take you from very simple to very complex. You can see here things like pod isolation within a namespace, strict namespace isolations, zero trust cluster security postures, lots of different areas to cover from that point of view.
I have to say, I really like this because it gives the right people the right, privileges, access, stuff to help with that troubleshooting process. Our Hope 9 made a comment earlier about, how many folks you want in the meetings when you're doing triage and stuff like that, which is certainly valid. Especially in my anecdotal experience, kind of medium to small organizations. But like I used to work with, and Johnny, I think you were the same, right? Working with like government organizations where you've got hard silos, and like this type of stuff is really, really helpful because it gets rid of a lot of the overhead of, somebody mentioned like SDN and SDN. Like how many layers does the network team have to go through to figure out what's going on, or they have to teach the application admin who has access to the pods to be able to look for these things, who has to teach the OpenShift admin who has access to the nodes to look for these. So to me, this type of stuff is really, really helpful to be able to control that at the appropriate place.
Yeah,
this is awesome.
And then the other side of this as well, for the Entrea piece, I don't think I touched on this earlier. We also support Entrea on bare metal OpenShift nodes as well. So again, that's another way to bring that policy networking control together into your full environment for that centralized team, or make life a little bit easier for them as well.
Hey Dean, does it make sense to have something like an Istio or a service mesh, or does Entrea really kind of like replace that?
So obviously service mesh, the whole idea there is kind of bringing that global level of control between clusters and availability of your application. So Entrea doesn't deal with that in terms of service routing between clusters on a global level, even if that global level is two separate clusters within your data center. And this is really around the pod-to-pod communication, that networking control. Obviously, Red Hat has Red Hat Service Mesh available to cover those pieces. VMware, we have our Tanzu Service Mesh as well, which is supported with OpenShift to give you abilities to actually be able to do that and scale out applications as well. And if you are looking to do a service mesh in your environment, then that gives you a different level of control as well. So you can look at the headers and the requests coming into your application from an end user through their web browser and control at that level. You can also do service redirection or control based on service level objectives as well at business level, which is a different way to look on maybe some more of the networking, connectivity, and security controllers, looking at it from a CNI point of view. But it's definitely something that we probably should also talk about in the future, right?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes, service mesh and the distributed tracing, the Jaeger functionality is really cool from an application standpoint of seeing, Dean, you highlighted it. Like, yeah, I can see the headers. Yeah,
distributed tracing, that was the word I was missing.
Yeah, you can see the headers. You can see precisely how long an API call took and stuff like that. So Robert asks, Entrea visibility into Nsxt and policy options make it so much more attractive than NCP. Are there any compelling reasons left to use NCP?
Yeah, so obviously we've been building the NCP for a lot longer than Andrea to begin with, so there are some features that won't quite cross over today. Yeah, if you are interested in that overlay networking, and bringing everything to the same overlay, for example, especially if you are looking at distributing environments across your data center, then the NCP is probably the right way to go from that point of view. There is a couple of different supportability pieces away. So again, if you want bare metal nodes being brought into the same CNI, then that's supported by Entrea. It's not supported by NCP today. And then there's a few things around like encryption and how we handle bringing load balance services from NSX into your cluster as well. Whereas again, Entree doesn't have a load balance capability, so you would have to bring a load balancer into the system. So again, we have our own offerings, but again, we see customers kind of using different solutions out there for that. So it's about the flexibility and what you want to take advantage of today. We're making it simple. We've got an enterprise model for you to consume and a full backed enterprise software. We've got the open source software which you can consume, and that comes with a different level of service behind it, of course. Like as all things when running an enterprise environment.
Yep, the age old, where do you get support from?
Yes.
So I know we're about 12 minutes over at this point. I want to be respectful of your time, Dean. So for our audience, if you have any questions, we'll take about another 3 minutes. Please don't hesitate to submit those questions over. If we don't have time to address those, I will make sure that we take all of them. We'll address those in the blog post, and we'll follow up with Dean as well. And Dean, I'm sure that you would be very, very welcome to come back on the stream at any point in time.
I think we might have to do a week of this, of like an hour session, like one day every day for a week, because it's like I think I covered like one subject in the end properly. But yeah, I think hopefully for I really want to focus on that slide to begin with about some of the integrations that are available, because when I go to a lot of customers, they're typically available today, and the different silos within the customers don't realize. And I say, hey, well, integrate with your VMware storage. You're not paying extra for it; it's there. Consume it. If you're using NSX, get the NCP installed if you want some of the features that are available there. If you've got VROPs and you're running on top of vSphere, install the management pack and start getting that end-to-end visibility. It really makes sense. Is the assisted installer supported on VMware, or is the assisted installer only for bare metal nodes? So I think I'll leave that one for you, Andrew.
Yeah. So at this moment, assisted installer itself is tech preview, so it's not officially supported with anything. That being said, please do, if you are using it, if you do have issues, I know that team, they will unofficially support it as they work towards GA, which is coming up. So at this moment, I know it works with bare metal. I think they have moved. There was an internal preview where you could tick the box for do infrastructure integration, and it worked with VMware. I don't know if they've made that public yet. If you haven't looked at it in a little while, if you haven't tried the assisted installer, check and see if that box is there. But it is something that they're working on, more than just for bare metal.
Was the assisted installer, is that the one where you boot from an ISO image? Yeah. So. Yep. I remember speaking to someone inside of Red Hat when this was first kind of released to the wild as a preview, and they said, "Oh, we've not really tested it, but we have tested it and put it inside a virtual machine, and as long as the virtual machine can boot the ISO, right, it's the same as a bare metal machine. We just obviously, there's, like you say, a lot of considerations there. So again, I guess this is the great thing about the community, right? Everyone on this listening to us today, if they get involved, give us your feedback. This is where you start to see the differences come down the line of products, right?
Yeah, and it's as I'm sitting here thinking about this, I'm remembering that the team asked me to take a look at that internal preview, and I did, and I don't after like a 2-week or 3-week delay, and I don't think I ever sent on my feedback. So sorry folks, if you're listening to our live stream, I'll get that to you as soon as I can. So yeah, assisted installer is really cool. We've covered it a couple of times. I'll drop the links to those into the blog post when it goes out. But yeah, Dean, to your point, it's the one you go to console.redhat.com, you click the create a new cluster, and it gives you an ISO. You boot the nodes to that ISO, and then they pop into the interface, and you can, this one is a control plane, this one is a compute node, and go. So lots of cool stuff there. And I know there's some Red Hat folks who are working on, or they have figured out how to deploy assisted installer locally disconnected as well. So that way you can use it even if you don't have internet access. So with that being said, please, I'm sure that there are many more questions out there. Please don't hesitate. You can reach out to me, andrew.sullivan@redhat.com. So I will kick you. I saw your comment in there and all of that. Please, if you'd like, send me your support case number. I'll take a look at that and see if we can figure out any strangeness that was happening there. But anybody with questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me, andrew.sullivan@redhat.com, Practical Andrew, just like you've seen from the Twitch chat on Twitter. Johnny as well, I'll throw him under the bus, Johnny with no H. I knew Johnny for like 3 years before I figured that out, and he was very polite about it. But
You should see people spell my last name. It's always Richard. So yeah, always with the H.
And Dean, of course, Dean on Twitter, you are Saints DLE. I won't ask you to put your email out there. But yeah, thank you, everybody. We'll also include, thank you, Stephanie. I see you're on the ball. You included a link to Dean's blog inside of there. Dean has some really awesome blog posts about OpenShift on VMware inside of there, including a number of things on vRealize integration. So using vRealize automation to deploy OpenShift clusters programmatically, which is something that we get asked about. So yeah, but by all means, if you have any questions, if you have any stuff that you would like to send to us, please don't hesitate. As I mentioned earlier, if you haven't gotten subscribed, if you aren't kind of watching our calendar for stuff, please do so. We've got a number of sessions coming up, or a number of streams coming up. Next week is OADP and disaster recovery with, OADP is a part of that. Sorry, somebody asked about OADP, but it's ACM, ODF, OADP for disaster recovery. I think the week after that, we're going to put Johnny on the ball. We're going to talk about validated platforms.
Patterns.
Yeah, validated patterns. I'll get that right one day. And what's the one after that? Oh, performance add-on operator coming up in mid-February. So we've got a lot of really exciting stuff coming up, and that's just as far as we've made it. So, Dean, any last words?
So thank you very much for inviting me to talk today. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for being so kind with all the questions and giving me quite a lot to chat about. I would love to come and present back to you all again in the future. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us with questions, queries. With our open source stuff, please do communicate through us through the various GitHub discussions and so forth as well. And please do bring your questions and queries to both VMware and Red Hat. We're here. We do work together. We support each other's solutions. We are better together when it comes to virtualization. This is why we're here talking about it today, right? To show you all of these cool things that we've been working on together. And throughout the rest of this year, you're going to see more of that as well.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Thank you, Dean.
Yeah,
and
awesome.
Johnny, last words?
No, Dean, thank you. Outstanding today. This was awesome. You know, like the feedback from the crowd and everything. This was awesome. So thank you for coming out. We'd love to have you back.
No problem.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your week and stay safe out there.